Theon Greyjoy hasn't had the easiest time in HBO's hit series Game of Thrones, but who has? While he hasn't always been the most sympathetic of characters, as is usual for the rather brutal series, there's so much more going on behind those seemingly constant bewildered eyes. Let's take a look at the displaced Iron Islanders' road to redemption and visit some things you might not know. And before we start, beware. The video is long and full of spoilers. You've been warned! Theon Greyjoy is one of the first characters we meet in the series as a ward of the noble lords of Winterfell, the Starks. While Theon is part of the Stark entourage, he's of course not a Stark. Game of Thrones starts after an entire different Game of Thrones happened and seemed to be over. The Starks were part of a successful rebellion against a mad king that put Ned's buddy Robert Baratheon on the throne. After the upheaval, the notoriously difficult Iron Isles opened up their own rebellion, which was put down by the Starks. In that conflict, Theon's two brothers were killed, which already seems like a bummer, but for Theon it kinda worked out. Theon ended up a ward of the Starks as a guarantee against Balon Greyjoy getting any more rebellion ideas. Though Theon becoming a ward of the Starks might end up being fate after all. It turns out he was named after Theon Stark, or at least that's what he says while taking a tour of the Winterfell crypts where they keep the written history of their family. Theon Stark was known as a gaunt man who waged constant war, something Theon would eventually learn is not all it's cracked up to be. This reflects the initial problem of the now teenage Theon we meet in the first season. He's a Greyjoy, but when it comes right down to it, he rather likes the Starks and Winterfell. Instead of a pair of jerks for brothers, he's made a best friend in Robb Stark, and while Ned is rather distant, he looks up to him as well. Meanwhile, he has increasingly little ties with the homeland that he also feels the need to represent as its most immediate heir. Life can get complicated in the Seven Kingdoms. It's Theon that finds the Direwolf pups, one for each Stark child, including the bastard son, but not really Jon Snow on a trip back to Winterfell where the royal family has arrived so that Robert Baratheon could ask his old friend Ned to be hand to the king. It turns out it's the kind of job you don't give to people who want it. Ned being the hand to the king goes all kinds of wrong when he finds out the true parentage of Robert's children and ends up imprisoned in King's Landing. The end result, as far as Theon is concerned, is that his best bud Robb is going to war to get his now incarcerated dad out of prison. This means that Theon is his advisor. He also tries to be his enforcer, but it turns out the Direwolf is way better at the job. What Theon is good at, aside from being that friend of your big brother who's kind of a jerk but thinks he's being cool, is archery. Theon manages to shoot all the messenger ravens that Lord Walder Frey releases, which leaves the door open for Lady Catelyn Stark to negotiate with him. When the group captures the Kingslayer, brother to the Queen and also her secret lover, Jaime Lannister, all relationships in Westeros are complicated, Theon wants to send his head back to the Lannisters. Robb, however, has eyes on the prize of saving his family, and won't start beheading their family while members of his are in danger. Unfortunately, the Lannisters don't feel the same way, and after Robert's questionably timed death, they're in charge. Ned losing his head makes the Bannermen of the North declare Robb the king in the North, which Theon does after he asks Robb if they're brothers now and always. That seems touching, but by now we know that brothers in the Seven Kingdoms can be the biggest of jerks. After this, things just keep getting worse for, well, just about everybody. Theon convinces Robb that he needs a navy to pull off his rebellion, and he happens to know a place where he can get one, his homeland, the Iron Isles, where he presumably is the immediate heir. Unfortunately for Theon, he experiences what every former big man on campus experiences when they return home, namely that they're not as cool as they thought they were. After hitting on his sister without knowing it, we call that pulling a Skywalker, he meets with his dad who's less than thrilled that his only son is back. It turns out that all this time, Balon has been harboring resentment at his wayward son, and has been secretly wishing that he'd hurry up and die so that he could make Yara his heir, since she hasn't been civilized like Theon during his time with a loving and supportive family. Ever the approval junkie, Theon quickly forgets all that brothers forever stuff he told Robb and takes up a raiding mission from his father. But instead of just hitting soft targets with his lackluster crew, he decides he can make a name for himself by taking Winterfell. His plan works too. He raids an outpost that draws out the remaining defenses and then hits a largely undefended Winterfell, where he finds that forward planning isn't his strong suit, and it's also not a big thing among the Ironborn in general. They're raiders, not holders, and holding Winterfell proves to be a tricky proposition. There's a lot to cover here, so let's just get the highlights. To impress his family and homeland, who don't like him, he raided and took the homeland of the people who did like him. He not only beheaded the only guy who was willing to offer him redemption, he does it terribly. Then he gets seduced by the wildling girl he used to torment and loses the Stark boys Bran and Rickon. To cover for that whole mess, he hangs and burns a pair of farm boys and tells everyone that they were the Stark kids. He tries to pay recompense to the farmers whose children he killed, not only because it was messed up, but because they might have been his kids. It turns out the mother he took the kids from was also the woman he lost his virginity to, and someone he would, visit a lot. At this point, Theon Greyjoy is going for the title of biggest jerk in Westeros. Unfortunately for pretty much everyone, that's a really competitive field. He asks his sister to send reinforcements to hold Winterfell, but instead she shows up with 20 soldiers to explain holding things is not what Ironborn do. Theon mistakes advice as a lack of personal faith and decides to hold Winterfell anyway. You just can't tell some people anything. That's how he finds himself surrounded by the forces of Ramsay Snow, who, for the record, was way ahead in the standing of the biggest jerk in Westeros. Theon did what leaders do, as far as he knew, which was giving a rousing speech to his men and then leading them into battle. Except about halfway through, one of them bonks him on the head and turns him over to Ramsay in exchange for safe passage back to the sea where they belong. At this point, he's been such a jerk that audiences might have been ready for some bad things to happen to the snotty little wannabe conqueror, but then we met Ramsay Snow. The sadistic Ramsay had his own daddy issues to work out. Snow, of course, is the name given to bastard children of the North, essentially getting no name thanks to their dad's shenanigans. Ramsay was trying to win his father's favor and get himself a name that didn't describe the weather. Ramsay's dad, Roose, was no winner either. His plan was to betray the Ironborn by not giving them safe passage and by keeping Theon. Unfortunately, Theon is in the hands of his messed up son, Ramsay. How messed up is Ramsay? So messed up we can only give you the highlights. First, his men pretend to be Ironborn and torture Theon. Then he poses as an Ironborn servant sent by his sister to help him escape. During the escape, Ramsay kills his own men to assist Theon, who spills his guts about trying to impress his dad when, in reality, he was more a Northerner than Ironborn anyway. Ramsay leads the haggard Theon to what he thinks is his sister, but instead is back in the torture chamber he just escaped. And that's just Ramsay warming up. By the time he's done cutting and slicing Theon both physically and mentally, including removing what was rumored to be Theon's rather considerable, endowment, Ramsay gives the now broken Greyjoy a new name: Reek. This is where the HBO show has managed to take the already harsh world of the Song of Ice and Fire books and ramp things up. Most of the torture we get to see in the show is only implied in the book, but then Martin did write the script for the episode where that happened, so while it's only implied in the book, that episode might be validation that it did happen. Ramsay sends Theon's severed body part to Balon as a threat for him to withdraw from Winterfell. This doesn't faze Balon, as he thinks that Theon shouldn't have gone to Winterfell, and since he was no longer able to father an heir, he didn't care what happened to his lost son. Ramsay's father, Roose, is mad at his crazy bastard kid for having ruined what he had hoped would be a valuable hostage, but it turns out that as Reek, Theon was completely broken. He tells him that he never killed Bran and Rickon, and where the Boltons could find them. Ramsay uses Theon to gain access to Moat Cailin, that has been taken over by the Ironborn, offering them safe passage if they surrender. The leader, Ralph Kenning, rejects the offer, and of course in the middle of his rousing speech is killed by one of his own men who surrenders to the Boltons, who also betray them by killing them all. History sure does repeat itself. Even when Theon encounters his adopted sister Sansa, who has had her own troubles being handed off to every other monster in the Seven Kingdoms, he isn't able to break out of his role as Reek. He even gives away Sansa's plan to escape with the help of Brienne of Tarth. It's only after a lot of pleading and berating that Theon even admits he never killed her brothers. When Sansa does make a break for it, she winds up in the crosshairs of Ramsay's equally twisted girlfriend Miranda, and Reek, who pleads with Sansa to surrender. It's when Miranda promises to only name Sansa that Theon snaps back and pushes Miranda off the wall and makes a break for it with Sansa into the snow. He's not willing to go all the way to Castle Black to meet with Jon Snow, however, because he's fairly certain that Jon will kill him for all the messed up things he did. Which is fair, we guess. When he does finally meet with Jon, he tells Theon that rescuing Sansa is the only thing that keeps him alive. So, Theon makes his way back home where he finds his sister still mad at him for not taking the rescue she tried for him and thinking he's there for the throne now that Balon was dead. Instead, he agrees to back Yara as queen, which seems to work out great, until their traveling uncle emerges and claims it instead. Theon and Yara slip out during the coronation process and steal the best ships in the fleet, hooking up with Daenerys and agreeing to her terms of no more raiding. They were probably lying about that, but Daenerys is new in town. While working for the Dragon Queen, they run into their uncle again, with Yara being captured and Theon making a break for it. After surviving a cool hand Luke-style beating, he earns enough of the remaining Ironborn's respect to rescue Yara and tell her that he's going back to Winterfell to further atone for his jerkwad ways. This leads to the Battle of Winterfell, where Theon makes a last stand defending the Stark boy he once pretended to kill, Bran. As the Night King approached, hoping to end the Three-Eyed Raven, Bran's new gig, Bran was able to tell Theon he was a good man. Eventually, Theon showed how much of a good man he was and died at the hand of the Night King protecting the Starks. After a whole lot of messed up things happened to him, most of which that honestly were his fault, his redemption arc was something special to see. And that's everything you didn't know about Theon Greyjoy from Game of Thrones. Are you a super fan of the series? What part of Theon's story is your favorite that we left out? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, why not subscribe to CBR for more videos? Thanks for watching.